Wonder Boys may be the best movie about writing ever. It may be the only movie about actually writing itself ever. Granted, not much time is spent showing the protagonist actually typing at the typewriter, but his progress on a 2,611-page manuscript, so far, is central to the plot, and along with many adventures during a chaotic 3-day literature conference, which include an unexpected pregnancy, professional rivals, a dead dog, stolen cars, breaking and entering, Marilyn Monroe's wedding outfit, sexual tension with students, and more, amidst all this craziness, there's a lot of pearls of writerly wisdom that get dropped.
Well, I was just explaining to her how a book comes to be published, what you do as a writer, what I do as an editor, you know.
I sweat blood for 5 years, and he corrects my spelling.
And actually, it's 7 years.
But what does it matter what anybody thinks? Most people don't think, James. It's not about writing. Books, they don't mean anything. Not to anybody. Not anymore.
His book?
Yeah.
You read his book?
Yes.
Is it good?
It's true.
It's like all of your sentences always existed, just waiting up there in style heaven for you to fetch them down.
If you didn't know what it was about, why were you writing it?
I couldn't stop.
I had a girlfriend once who said that she would love to watch me write because she knew it was my passion. But the fact is, A, it would just be me at a keyboard, which is not exciting, and B, you can't write while being watched. That's paralyzing. The process of writing is intrinsically not cinematic. So most movies about writing are about just about anything else. Sometimes it's fictional incidents that supposedly inspired real works of literature.
Romeo and Ethel, the pirate's daughter.
Like Shakespeare in Love or In the Heart of the Sea. And that's cute, I guess. Another option is to focus on the author's personal trauma. But as much as I love reading Dylan Thomas, the biographical film Edge of Love just makes me sad that a great writer who speaks to my soul was not actually a great man. The same goes for Fitzgerald and Hemingway, though I do love Midnight in Paris for lampooning both of them. Sometimes that can lend itself to cinema. Mank follows the insanity of the development of Citizen Kane, which Pauline Kael has detailed in a lengthy essay about Mankiewicz versus Orson Welles. There's a handful of movies about how the movie industry destroys any chance of a piece of writing surviving the movie-making process, like Sweet Liberty and The Strike. But these films aren't about writing, they're about the agony of being a writer faced with the crass demands of the market. What makes Wonder Boys special is that several of its characters are actually excellent writers.
I want to publish this.
Successful or soon to be successful, or previously successful. The main story follows the dialectic between a one-hit wonder, Professor Grady Tripp, and his best student, a sociopathic liar named James Lear. The two are cast together during a 3-day writers' conference at Grady's Pittsburgh University, and as Grady's life unravels over the weekend, he clings to the hope of saving James somehow. On first glance, Grady feels like David Foster Wallace, the enigmatic author of Infinite Jest, whose insanely detailed descriptions of tennis and other games at a private school are echoed in Grady's new book, which goes into
Genealogies of everyone's horses and the dental records and so on, and
like Foster Wallace, Grady has one great novel, substance abuse problems, and issues with his ex. But Michael Chabon, the Sacred Wonderkind, who wrote Wonder Boys as well as Cavalier and Clay, The Mysteries of Pittsburgh, and other fine novels, says that Grady Tripp was actually based on Chuck Kinder, his writing teacher at University of Pittsburgh. Kinder had struggled for years to complete a novel heavily inspired by the life of short story master Raymond Carver. At one point, the book really did end up to be about 3 volumes of about 1,000 pages each, Mr. Kinder told the media. In my mind, it was like Ulysses meets On the Road, meets Dune, meets Remembrance of Things Past, meets 100 Years of Solitude. Notes on Ulysses, Tennyson's, not Joyce's, do appear in the background of Wonder Boys. Dune and 100 Years of Solitude are not really present, but On the Road is there, at least in the author's inability to tone himself down.
Is all of that single-spaced?
I'm afraid so, yeah.
but it sort of reads in places like you didn't really make any choices.
In many ways, this film reminds me of The Big Lebowski. On a surface level, it features robe-clad, hapless stoners as heroes of stories that they themselves don't really comprehend. Some of both movies' reveals are far more shocking to the protagonists than they were to the audience. Also, in the film's devotion to the locales. In Lebowski, Los Angeles, and in Wonder Boys, Pittsburgh. The bridges of Pittsburgh show up dozens of times in Wonder Boys, and Carnegie Mellon is used as the backdrop. And, of course, both show the downward spiral of a hero who is at first humiliated, then faced with meaningless theft, then injured, has a priceless object stolen from his own stolen car, and watches that car get slowly destroyed by various factions.
Someone jumped on your car with their butt.
How can you tell?
Well, you can see the outline of a butt.
Anyhow, they're both hilarious and sad movies, including a lot of marijuana. I'll admit I have a mild aversion to narration, and the voiceovers in Wonder Boys are maybe its weakest feature. Sam Elliott's narration in Lebowski certainly works better than Douglas's interior monologues in Wonder Boys, which are revealed last minute to be bits of Grady's autobiographical novel about that weekend. Lebowski, on the other hand, has Sam Elliott deliver his cowboy shtick as some sort of otherworldly commentator, maybe the dude's guardian angel. His voiceovers, like the rest of the film, dare you to complain about the subversion of narrative conventions. Wonder Boy's narration falls into the trap of tell, don't show, but that's a pretty small complaint about a film whose dialogue otherwise is brilliantly witty.
And that is a big trunk. It holds a tuba, a suitcase, a dead dog, and a garment bag almost perfectly.
Yeah, that's just what they used to say in the ads.
Maybe that adds a meta layer of hearing director Curtis Hanson and writer Steve Kloves having trouble distancing the film adaptation from its source novel, which they and I both love. Side note, the novel lacks the movie's tidy Hollywood ending, which I actually prefer. Digging a little deeper, both films show their protagonist picking up language like a magpie and repurposing it.
This will not stand, this aggression against Kuwait.
The dude minds. This will not stand, you know? This aggression will not stand, man.
I guess there's probably a story behind that.
There is, but it's not very interesting. I guess there's probably a story there.
There is, but it's not very interesting.
Know that she has been banging Jackie Treehorn, to use the parlance of our times.
A young trophy wife in the parlance of our times, you know.
Yeah, well, the moment didn't actually present itself. I thought you were the guy that didn't like to lose control of his emotions.
Maybe I just needed the moment to present itself.
They're both movies about self-education, taking the clay that life gives you and sculpting it into a new creation. The cast is filled out by Grady's editor, Crabtree, played by Robert Downey Jr. Crabtree slowly realizes that there's a cultural shift happening, and what Professor Grady has not been able to deliver, the young James Lear can. Downey Jr. plays a desperate, strung-out editor at the end of his rope. Despite the actor's personal demons, Downey Jr. hadn't really stopped putting out great performances. Check out Kiss Kiss Bang Bang for one of his best roles, and of course Chaplin. His dazed adventures here may seem a little too close to home. I'm thrilled that the actor pulled himself out of his downward spiral, predicted back in Less Than Zero, but there's a lot of work he did in those difficult years that's really worth watching. The film's intellectual center comes from Katie Holmes as Hannah Green, another bright student. Not as talented as James, but brilliant in other ways.
Anna already has 2 stories published in the Paris Review, so you better dust off your A material.
You didn't tell me you were a writer.
You didn't ask.
At first she seems, to herself as well as to the audience, to be just the next in line of beautiful young women to hook up with Grady, who has just lost his 20-something wife as the movie opens. Self-assured and with a keen eye for good or bad writing, the quirky Hannah seems able to navigate the dangerous waters of editing in a way that Crabtree has failed to do. She gives Grady the dressing down that sets up his final reformation. Holmes is fantastic in the role, tender as any 20-year-old meeting her idols would be, and ultimately the character whose long-term career is the most assured. The film's heart comes from Frances McDormand, Grady's mistress, Sarah. Grady's married, Sarah's married to his boss. She wants clarity, and he can't make any decisions. Clearly they have things to work out. Grady's utter failure to assert himself is starkly reflected in Sarah's repeated disappointments. Michael Chabon later wrote Spider-Man 2, starring Tobey Maguire, maybe one of the finest superhero movies ever made, and Robert Downey Jr., of course, became Tony Stark, a grown-up version of Crabtree and a mentor to Spider-Man, now played by Tom Holland. Maguire and Holmes had worked together previously in Ang Lee's The Ice Storm. Given how many aspiring artists there are in this town, it's alarming to see how small it feels sometimes. But I digress. This is a writer's movie. Crabtree and Grady's successes are in the past. James's greatness hasn't been recognized yet by anybody besides Grady. Hannah's off to a great start, and Rip Torn's obnoxious Q as the keynote speaker for the conference.
What is the bridge from the water's edge of inspiration to the far shore of accomplishment?
a jackass who publishes a book every 18 months, flirts badly with Hannah, and honestly reminds me of superstar psychologist Phil Zimbardo. And then there's Sarah's husband, Walter, who is oblivious to his wife's infidelity. He's too focused on his book about Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe. There's a lot of talk about what it means to be a writer. Crabtree and Grady play games in a bar, inventing the novel off the top of their heads. But James Lear pops in and seems to write circles around both of them.
Because,
He was killed when a gangster named Freddie Nostrils tried to shoot his favorite horse. Claudel took the bullet himself. Vernon was in on the hit.
Even when he's catatonic. Grady, Sarah, and Crabtree all face their bodies not working like they used to.
Stand up then. I'm too old for all this rolling around on the floor.
The college setting helps us work smoothly. Old hands who may or may not still have it are faced with students who may or may not have it at all. As somebody who spent nearly 20 years in academic settings, I love how Wonder Boys captures both the joy and despair of that milieu.
Nobody teaches a writer anything. You tell them what you know. You tell them to find their voice and stay with it. You tell the ones that have it to keep at it. You tell the ones that don't have it to keep at it too, because that's the only way they're going to get where they're going.
You're surrounded by bright minds, petty jealousies, and a river of youth who come and go while the institution remains the same. The students are the reason you're there. Your job, though, is to get them in and out with whatever wisdom you might have to impart. There are geniuses and frauds, and everybody's worried, including the faculty, that they might be the frauds. Wonder Boys never really stops being funny in its tragic way. Alan Tudyk pops up for a bizarre conversation about Errol Flynn's sex life. Grady gets hunted down by the president of the James Brown Hair Club. Just watching Crabtree try to chase down the pages of the manuscript that's supposed to have saved his career, which he himself dumped into the Monongahela River because he's an idiot, is both touching and hilarious. In the end, Wonder Boys is a great movie about life, how quickly success can come and go, how love and lust aren't what we think they are when we're young, and they're often not what we think they are when we're getting old. It's a great movie about writing, the process, the business, the baloney, and maybe most importantly, how to get better. James Lear's inveterate lying isn't too different from the people-watching games played by professionals like Grady and Crabtree. Their storytelling is just working it out, keeping in practice. A smart friend of mine once told me that only 20% of what you write will ever be any good, which means that every time you've written something awful, you've written 1/5 of your next masterpiece. Maybe he was optimistic, but writers really need optimism.
Why's your car over there? And who's that sitting in it?
James Lear.
What's he doing here?
I'm sort of helping him through some issues.
Isn't he lucky?